Come on in. Welcome to Idled Out, where we talk all things Survivor. My name is Luke, and today we're talking about Survivor jurors who didn't vote for their number one ally to win the game. It's a sort of conventional wisdom on Survivor. Heidi voted for Jenna, Malcolm voted for Denise, Rupert voted for Sandra twice. Even world's saltiest man Grant voted for Boston Rob, then promptly never spoke to him ever again. Close allies almost always vote for their number one to win the game. Well, about that. Throughout Survivor history, there have been a number of jurors who opted not to vote for their number one at the end, instead casting their vote for a different player. And sometimes these votes have even dictated the outcome of the game itself. Some votes were motivated by bitterness and jealousy, of course, but also there are plenty of players who simply felt their ally played an inferior game to those they were sitting next to at the end. It's mostly bitterness and jealousy, though. So today, I thought it would be fun to go through the most shocking cases of allies not voting for their number ones at the end. Cases where the audience, and probably the finalists themselves, thought that a particular vote was locked in, only for the juror to go rogue in the voting booth. I'll be ranking mostly by how surprising these votes were, while also trying to cover the full breadth of reasons players might not vote for their number one. Keep in mind, though, that this is hardly an exhaustive list, and there are definitely many more players who didn't vote for their Survivor bestie to win the million, so let me know in the comments who I didn't include. Grab your legacy advantage, poison the well, and meet me at Ponderosa as we count down 5 Survivor jurors who shockingly didn't vote for their number one ally to win the game. At number 5 is Carla not voting for Cassidy in Survivor 43. Well, Cassidy, I've got good news and I've got bad news. The good news is you made it all the way to the end with the very beatable Gabler and Owen. The bad news is all your friends are on the jury. This is the vote heard around the world, which Carla still gets shit for to this day. A reheated new era version of Debbie not voting for Aubrey in Survivor Co. Wrong. Carla and Cassidy ran pre-merge Coco alongside James, only for their relationship to slowly deteriorate throughout the post-merge thanks to their own inherent personality clashes, multiplied by other players pitting them against one another, divided by Carla promising to poison the well against Cassidy if she voted her out. That equals Carla voting for Gabler. For a lot of the audience, the math wasn't mathing on this one, because despite all of the above, it still seemed like Cass had, at the very least, Carla and James's votes locked up, given her prominent role in the edit and her lack of inspiring final tribal competitors. Who are you gonna vote for? The kooky palm frond man? Very few seriously thought that Cassidy would lose, and even fewer thought she would lose the vote of an ally she once considered her number one. Carla's explained her vote repeatedly by saying that Cassidy's social game was not as hot as she thought it was. But I really don't think she needs to repeatedly justify this when clearly the majority of the jury felt similarly. One simply cannot deny the sheer magnetism of the social butterfly, challenge beast, the strategic god known as the Alligabler. At number 4 is Christian not voting for Nick in Survivor David vs. Goliath. Now, time has proven Christian right on this one, but at the time, Christian voting for Mike over Nick was truly shocking, as pretty much everyone assumed Christian was a locked Nick vote the second he left the game. Christian and Nick were, if not number ones, extremely close allies dating all the way back to their first few days on David Beach, and they worked together nearly the entire game. And though Nick did vote for Christian when he left the game, Christian is hardly the type of juror to be bitter. And he wasn't. He voted objectively, believing that Mike played the better game. Post-game interviews illuminated Christian's thought process further, including how impressed he was that Mike leveraged his charm and secret nightly one-on-ones to have the most information of everyone in the game at any given point. And in true Christian fashion, he even made a chart of the finalists and their level of control throughout the game. Christian's got a scientific mind, and I think he's just the type of player who will always value control and social capital over flashy underdog plays, but in the moment this was still a pretty surprising vote. considering the closeness and depth of Nick and Christian's relationship we saw on screen. In hindsight, though, a great move for Christian that ages better every year. Not only for Nick's political career, but also that Mike gave Christian a background cameo on Season 3 of The White Lotus. And for God's sake, keep Nick away from watching this current season, lest he get any new legislation ideas. At number 3 is David and Jess not voting for Ken in Survivor Millennials vs. Gen X. From their humble beginnings on Gen X Beach, David, Ken, and Jess were a trio of lovable underdogs who fought their way to the top of the Gen X tribe. Ken chose to play a very loyal game, hanging his reputation on how loyal and trustworthy an ally he was, the kind of guy who would go down with the ship rather than find a life raft. Post-merge, Ken and David voted together on literally every vote. Except for one. At Final Four, Ken faced the same problem a lot of players who play the undying loyalty game do. Sometimes you pledge your loyalty to the best player of the season, and at the end you have no winning path. Either go to the end with your ally and lose, or vote them out and look like a massive hypocrite. Which is what Ken did. At Final Tribal, Ken spent most of his time defending his Day 38 decision to vote David out. And like many of his generation trying to convert a PDF, he was often confused, emotional, completely frazzled. We all knew Ken lost this game well before Final Tribal, but it still seemed like David and Jess might throw their votes his way, only they joined the chorus in voting for Adam. David in particular was cautiously complimentary of Ken's game after the fact, but said he simply identified with Adam's messy but strategically focused game more. But he also said he's actually glad he didn't win the money, so this exit interview may not be entirely canon. Yeah, if you say so, man. At number 2 is Victoria not voting for Gavin in Survivor Edge of Extinction. For a lot of Edge of Extinction, Victoria and Gavin were ride or dies. Specifically, Victoria was going to ride this alliance all the way to Final Tribal, and Gavin was gonna die at Final Tribal. But Victoria's endgame plans all came apart at the Final 5, when a late re-entry challenge sent Chris back into the game. At the new Final 6, Victoria's voted out and pledges her vote to Gavin on her way out the door.
Victoria, the tribe has spoken.
I'm not sure which of you did it. Devin's good play. Gavin, vote for you, man.
The EOE Final 3 is hardly knocking my socks off, but of these 3, I fully expected Gavin to win, because at least he wasn't voted out of the game. And while some of the non-Gavin votes were surprising, the most surprising was Victoria's. She spent her entire 36 days in the game with Gavin, the two of them voting identically nearly every vote. But she instead cast her vote for a guy who was voted out third, who she spent a single freaking day with. No, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that Gavin played some sort of incredible game or anything, but Victoria of all people going for Chris was truly shocking, especially since just an hour before this vote, we saw her pledge her vote to Gavin as her torch was snuffed. Per her own exit interviews, her pro-Gavin sentiment on her way out the door was an attempt to put a target on his back, since she figured he knew she was going home this round, but we never saw her final words to back that up, so this still feels like a bit of a question mark for me. Was her jury vote revenge for this betrayal, or did she feel like most of the jury, that Chris played more game in a few days than Gavin did in 39? I think a lot of confusion on this vote can come down to the edit. This was an overstuffed finale, where the winner had to basically be reintroduced to the audience, and they had a lot of jury votes to explain, so on one hand, I get it. But the Victoria and Gavin relationship was one of the few storylines Kama got, and it should have been paid off, rather than as a bizarre question mark hanging over the end of the season. A question I'm still not sure we ever got a fully satisfactory answer for. But like who this guy is, or why Joe was on this season for a third time, maybe some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. At number 1, the most surprising juror who didn't vote for their closest ally is Maria not voting for Charlie in Survivor 46. Maria and Charlie were close strategic allies going back to the early days of Sega, and for most of the game, they worked together. They had control of Sega, they were largely in the majority post-merge, but they ultimately emerged as each other's largest targets and had a respectful breaking up, both understanding it was in their best interest to take a shot at the other. They believed each other to be their biggest competition, and Charlie simply won the war. When Maria goes, it's an emotional tribal council. Charlie shouts out Maria's kids and calls them his future nephews. He gets a big hug from Maria after voting her out, and they even give her a round of applause as she leaves. But at Final Tribal, Maria casts her vote not for her closest ally, but for Kenzie. Maria is of course entitled to vote for whoever she wants for whatever reason she wants, but her bizarre explanation that Kenzie had more fire in her eyes during Final Four fire making really just came off as a way to justify what a lot of people perceived as spur-of-the-moment bitterness in the voting booth.
I think I've said this before, I'm a competitor, and the fire in this woman's eyes when she made fire last night, that to me clinched it for me.
Not exactly sure where that fire was coming from, because this Final Four fire making went on so long, some of the jury thought they were going to have to bring out matches. To make things worse for Charlie, Maria's vote for Kenzie cost him the game. Had Maria voted for Charlie, Kenzie and Charlie tie, and Ben is demoted to final juror Laurel style, and he would have voted for Charlie to win. In the history of shocking jury votes, this one is one of the most surprising of all time, made even more jaw-dropping by Maria's fire in her eyes justification. Fire in eyes meet salt in wound. Got nothing else for ya. Don't be a bitter juror. Like and subscribe and I'll get you more Survivor content just like this. Until next time, don't get idled out.